when all of that ended, it took a little while for me to work out what was I going to do next? What do I do today? I don't share my stories. Like, I don't like being on this side of the interview. Then I get a quick message saying she's going to jump online. She wants to do it over Zoom in 30 minutes. I'm like, oh my God, John, take the dog. Had to quickly have a shower, wash my hair, look a bit decent and presentable. And we covered many stories that were emotionally challenging, and we had each other's back. And you can't share those times and then walk away and not have a friendship forever. I've been there, done that. You know, I had a great time. I did 14 extraordinary years. I left on top. I don't believe in going back.
Melissa Doyle, finally, welcome to the Stella Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's so lovely to have you here. You and I have never been in conversation before, but I have had the privilege of interviewing some amazing people, as have you. But you know who hasn't been on the Stella Podcast? Oprah Winfrey. You, Mel Doyle, are about to sit down opposite Oprah, interview her on stage when she is here in Australia. Oprah in Conversation with Mel Doyle. It's kicking off in Sydney on December 4, and then Adelaide, Brisbane and Melbourne. Now, Oprah announced this on her Instagram. I mean, there's so many bucket list moments already. And, of course, being Oprah, she didn't just say it, she sang it. Tell me about that moment for a start.
I think I definitely need to clip that up and use it as my voicemail.
Absolutely.
Look, it's been an extraordinary ride so far. Feeling that moment of being selected, of the honour to interview somebody so iconic. I think we all agree that, you know, what she's achieved as a woman in media, what she's achieved as a woman, what she has achieved as a businesswoman is phenomenal. So to have the opportunity to sit down with her and pick her brains, you know, ask her a million questions is phenomenal. I'm really excited. So yeah, when she announced it and I got the Melissa Doyle, that was pretty exciting. You know, I'm still pinching myself. I'm hoping we're going to try to catch up the day before it all kicks off so that we can actually meet in person and I can get all my, you know, inner 15-year-old fangirling out of the way so that when we take to the stage, I can relax into it. But it's certainly intimidating, you know, the pressure I put on myself to make sure I do a good job. You really want to impress Oprah Winfrey. But I'm more than anything, I'm just really, really excited. I mean, what a phenomenal woman to have the opportunity to interview. And I'm sure like you know, you put up your hand I'll talk to anybody. Everybody's story fascinates me. So I'm just really, really intrigued to sit down and talk to her and ask her a million questions. I think wrapping it up in time is going to be the hardest part.
Would you like to give us a little preview of any questions that you think you might want to put to her? Is there anything in particular that you think has been unexplored in her well-documented story that might resonate particularly with the audiences and with Australian audiences?
I think it's more, I've got the areas that I want to cover, but the specific questions will be on the night. You know, that's what makes a conversation rather than an interview. I don't want to sit there reading my notes, but there are certain touch points, obviously talking about her phenomenal career, you know, from a girl in a poor family who started in radio at 16, became a newsreader, you know, gets dumped from the news reading position and they pop her in a talk show to run out her contract, and then it becomes the Oprah Winfrey Show for the next 25 years and, you know, the empire that she built around it. So I think all of those things work. I think the thing that I've most admired about her is her authenticity, you know, her purpose. She's always stood for goodness. I think she truly changed the face of television, that TV went from being this, you know, conduit for information to actually being able to do something good. You know, she's so positive and inspiring and empowering and all of those words and all of those messages, but she put that on television at a time when nobody else did. And I think she really changed the face of the program she was doing and what she stood for. So, you know, definitely talk about that, why that matters to her, why that has been so important to her. Pardon me. Yeah, her purpose. You know, she's 71. She's still working hard. She's still building things. She's still creating things. She's still making things. So how do you keep going? How do you find the next chapter in your life and you know, pivot? So so many questions. She's keen to talk about her health journey. She's been very open about struggling with obesity all of her life, and she has found the answer for her. So she's big into hiking. So, sharing some of those stories, which I'm sure there'll be many people in the audience who can relate. So kind of everything and anything, really, and then just seeing where the conversation goes.
Because there is so much, as you say, the biggest challenge will be trying to
Yeah.
rein it in because you could be there for a whole week. There are so many cultural moments that people connect with her. There is the discussion around body image and weight that she was at a forefront of. There's her experience as a woman, now a woman at 71 and still remaining so visible. There is that evolution that you've talked about there in the media, everything that's changed from chat show through to she's done everything. She
Yeah.
was editing magazines. She's,
Yeah.
of course, doing a podcast. But also, I think there's so many milestones you almost forget. I was talking recently to somebody about the work that Oprah had done in really changing the conversation and educating people about how we understand sexual assault of children and particularly grooming, what we now come to know as grooming. And I remember when the allegations about Michael Jackson resurfaced again in light of a documentary about 6 years ago, you may recall Oprah did another show about it where she had male survivors and she said, this was really my life's work. And to think what she had been doing in the 80s and the 90s when there wasn't even a name for it, Mel.
Remember that image where they were all in the audience, the men in the audience of that show holding up the photo of themselves at the age where they were abused? I mean, that just sucker punch. So I think definitely has had conversations in a way that is natural to her, and she shares, she's been so incredibly open in an industry where, as a journalist, I don't share my stories. Like, I don't like being on this side of the interview because it is my job to be the facilitator for someone else's storytelling, somebody else's experiences. So I think the fact that she did that, but she also walked that line where she gave so much of herself, and for that, I really admire her. Like you say, she talked about sexual abuse in a time where we weren't openly talking about it. She talked about weight and her body issues at a time where, I remember watching the Victoria Beckham doco, and she talks about someone asked her to weigh herself when she'd just given birth. I mean, seriously, the things that we did and the conversations that we had that were so inappropriate, I think she's brought a lot of those issues into public focus at a time when we weren't, and she still is. So I really admire that she shared so much of her own life. She talked about her mother when her mother was dying and the fractured relationship that they had, and, the way she grew up and how and where. And yeah, I think that's a pretty brave thing to do.
And even what she has witnessed in her life, I mean, the people she has met, the parts of the world she has travelled to, the things she has lived through, that poverty-stricken childhood, the abuse, and the, being with the most powerful people in the world.
Imagine the story she's got. If I could just, give her a few wines and we could really tuck in.
Yeah.
But I feel like she's always been on my, when you have your fantasy dinner party list, she's been on mine because it's the 1 degree of separation. I feel like I couldn't get all of those people around the table, so I would have had Oprah Winfrey and Michael Parkinson because they've interviewed everybody.
Yes.
And that's what fascinates me, of who stood out to them, who surprised them, who did she come away from talking to feeling, I mean, I know she won't tell us this because obviously, you don't give everything up, but who left her cold? Who really made her change her thinking, her trajectory, her next project. They're the moments that I think would interest all of us. So I'm hoping she'll share some of those.
She was on air at a time where you had people like Jerry Springer, for instance. So, and then Oprah really in the mid-90s did take a turn and start to canvas much more meaningful issues and really shaped you will establish that with her, but what would she call that? Like the second act of her career. There was a real gear change, I think.
And using her platform for good. It's something I've always admired, whether it be somebody in media, whether it be somebody in Hollywood, politics, whatever field, sport, who has a platform and a profile and wants to do something with it that really can make the world a better place. And I know that sounds very cliche, but I really think she was one who spoke positively, who was about inspiring others to live their best life, who was about encouraging companies and brands and businesses, the opposite. What's the opposite to being a gatekeeper? Somebody who is very generous in her support of someone or something. And I think she really radiated goodness. And that wasn't always what was done on television pre her show. We're seeing a lot more of it now, obviously, in every form, whether it be podcasting or in print or on television. But I think being able to recognize that she had this audience of people that wanted to be connected to something bigger and wanted to feel part of how do we make things better? How do we do good in the world? How do we spread kindness and empathy and all of those factors, which I truly think she was probably the first to do that.
I completely agree, Mel. I think she really was a trailblazer in that, and like all trailblazers, got criticism at the time.
Look, you can't get to where she reached, and even today, of being a woman in such a position of power, of wealth, of business acumen without having critics.
There just seems to always be a level of scrutiny and sometimes outrage when it is certain people in the zeitgeist, including, I think, a woman or a woman of colour.
I'm curious to see how she reflects on it. She's spoken a lot about, in the early days, being the only woman in the room and being the only person of colour in the room. And I think, imagine all the challenges that she faced and the knocks and all of those moments where, plenty of people would have packed up and gone home, and she kept going.
I mean, and even the things that we've spoken about haven't even touched upon the other parts of the business that she's been such a trailblazer in, standing up for, she went out and advocated for Barack Obama to become president, which was quite a risky decision at the time. She knew that might polarize some of her audience, but she felt as a woman of colour, she really wanted to make a decision there. I mean, she certainly has taken on people, and she may be surprisingly candid about who she has or hasn't liked, because I think she doesn't seem like somebody that really minces her words too much.
And there must be just an element of bravery where she goes, to hell with it. This is what I want to say. This is what I want to stand up for. This is what I want to do, and I can. So she does.
So how did it go about? She was on your dream dinner party list, and then next thing you're getting the call, she's announcing on Instagram that you will be the person. I imagine, being Oprah, she was very intentional in selecting anyone, because let's be honest, there would have been a lot of people that would happily have put their hand up for that gig.
I am sure she did her research, as did her team. But yeah, look, it's an honour. I genuinely feel honoured. I think throughout my career, interviewing, being the facilitator for somebody to tell their story has been the best part of my job. The biggest honour, the biggest responsibility, all of those factors. And to be able to have the opportunity to sit down with somebody as iconic as Oprah Winfrey and share her messaging, her story with the audience. But I think more than anything, just excited. I'm a journo. This is what I do. I'm just so pumped to be able to sit down with one of the biggest names I can think of and tell her story. And, look, every single story, I'm sure you're similar, every story that I've ever told, everybody that I've ever interviewed has had an impact on me. I've walked away with a little bit of something that they've said or something that they've done or the way that they've gone about whatever they might be navigating. And I've taken a little tiny bit of that with me going forward. And I hope it's made me a better journalist. I hope it's made me a more empathetic person. I hope it's made me a little, grayer around the edges, less black and white in my thinking. So I can't wait to learn from her.
What will the actual tour look like? I mean, will you be travelling around together on like Oprah's private jet, on a tour bus?
It's so funny you mentioned the tour bus. So our very first conversation was a Zoom chat. So it's early in the morning, I'm about to go and walk the dog, and my husband was working from home that day, and I thought it was a phone call with her team. Anyway, then I get a quick message saying she's going to jump online. She wants to do it over Zoom in 30 minutes. I'm like, oh my God, shit, John, take the dog. Had to quickly have a shower, wash my hair, look a bit decent and presentable. And so we just did a Zoom chat, and she just jumps on and, hi Mel, how are you? Really excited. Honestly, very cool. So just chatting. So we've had a few conversations so far online. And so as far as the tour goes, look, she'll be on her jet, as one does when you're a billionaire, with her senior Huppo team. I'll be travelling with all the rest of the production team. We're going from city to city. We've got 4 cities. And then we'll just, move along to the next spot and play it by ear.
Let me ask you then a little bit about your own career, because like Oprah, your career has gone through different incarnations, and you worked for a long time for one network, 7 Network. You were on Sunrise and then on Sunday night, and then 2020 in the pandemic, you left the 7 Network, and you have created what Angela Mollard described as a portfolio career when she interviewed you for Stella a few years ago. Let me ask you a little bit about that portfolio career. I know that you do some work on Smooth FM. You're co-hosting House of Wellness. You've written 2 books, obviously doing lots of emceeing and events. When you're not getting Zoom calls from Oprah saying, hey, Mel, what are you doing in early December, what does a normal, quote-unquote, day look for Melissa Doyle in late 2025?
So luckily for me, there isn't a normal day, which is what I thrive on. I think when Angela put that term to me, it clarified it in my head, because I feel like I love creating. I like doing new things. I like constantly learning. I love taking on something that I've never done before and doing my best to see if I can achieve something else. And that, I feel like I've always been my toughest critic. I've always been the one that keeps driving me to, all right, what can I do now? What can I try next? What can I create? I feel really lucky at this point in my career that I can do things that I want to do, things that resonate with me, things that have a meaning to where I am now at this point at, 55 and having been in the media forever. What you do in your 20s and your priorities are really, really different than they are 2 decades, 3 decades on. So I feel like I'm at that point where I'm able to say no to some things, which is such a luxury, of which I'm so appreciative, and say yes to others that really light my fire. I love creating. I like, I did the 2 books during COVID because they both came from a place where one was about aging, women aging, and that was like, I'm living this. I'm a journalist. What do I do when I have questions? I go get answers. So I'm not the only one. Let's put it into a book and find out those answers. The other one was a collection of stories of people who'd been through extraordinary things and had come through the other side. And I just felt that's what I wanted to read while we're all living in this weird pandemic world. What are some of the things that I want to hear? I want to hear from fabulously inspirational people that have just absolutely been nailed against the wall and come back from it. So, how do you tell those stories? So they were 2 things that really came from an authentic, natural place for me to do. I love Smooth FM. I'm saying it's a connection with an audience on a weekend. They're waking up and they're turning on the radio and wanting to listen to good music. House of Wellness has just become so much fun. My gosh, a lot more fun than I'd anticipated, as far as I thought it was going to be a program talking about health and wellness, dead giveaway. But it's kind of morphed into this late night chat show. We've got live music. We have a kitchen set up. In 1 minute, we've got Jimmy Barnes in the kitchen doing an acoustic version of one of his best songs. That's become a really fun thing, which I'm loving. So I feel very lucky to be able to pursue things that are just really exciting to me and where I'm at.
What about, was that something that you relaxed into quite soon?
No,
okay.
I feel like when you've been somewhere for so long, you become a little bit, I don't want to use the word institutionalized, but almost, I'd always been on a contract I'd been at 7 for 25 years. So I always knew what I was doing the next day, where I was going to be, even if the stories were changing. Sunday night was, the most fantastic highlight of my career, and I never knew where I was going to be on any given day, but I always knew what I was doing. I had the program that we were working towards and telling those stories. I had an office to go to. I had people around me that I loved and adored and respected, and we were doing this together. And so when all of that ended, it took a little while for me to work out, what was I going to do next? What do I do today? I suddenly had days to myself where I could walk the dog at midday, and that threw me. I kind of didn't quite know what to do when I wasn't being busy. And so that took a bit of adjusting. And for like a lot of people, it was smack in the middle of COVID. And so I honestly took a while to find my feet, not only after what had happened to me personally, but also find my feet in this new world that we were trying to navigate. So yeah, there was a lot of factors going on, and it was quite a period of transition. I think anybody who changes jobs or whatever the circumstances might be, I would imagine probably struggle with some of those similar things. And, people had always identified me as being with Seven Network or being on Sunday Night or being on Sunrise. And so suddenly I was no longer that person. So who am I? What am I going to do next? And so in the beginning, there's a little bit of, how do I, what do I do? But then once I settled into it, there was also that fabulous moment of going, oh my God, what an amazing opportunity of what am I going to do? What do I want to do now? Who am I? How am I different to who I used to be? What are the things that really float my boat? And what do I want to embrace and what do I want to let go of? And that is so liberating, I think, for anybody, let alone a woman in her 50s, to be able to almost like a bit of a life audit, a bit of a self-audit, of going, well, these are the things that really matter to me that I want to do. These are the things that don't so much. Like I say, I feel really lucky I was able to do that. But yeah, there were scary moments along the way. I think anyone in the world of freelance has those moments of, am I going to be busy? And I sort of had this attitude of I'll say yes to everything. Everything that comes my way, every opportunity, grab it, even if it's a little bit different than what I wanted. And then all of a sudden, the chickens came home to roost and I was suddenly really busy, and of having that moment of going, oh my God, what? I didn't need to panic quite so much. It's going to be okay. Now let's be a little more mindful in our decision making.
And you sound like you found that sort of happy medium now, what to say yes to.
I hope so,
and
yeah.
then what to say no to.
I mean, look, it still ebbs and flows. There are times where I'm madly busy and there are times where I'm not. But I've learnt to sit in the quiet times now, just to make the most of it. That list of to-do things around the house that you're meaning to get to, now I can do them. There's a few rooms that need repainting. Well, after touring with Oprah, I will have some downtime. So I'm going to paint the lounge room, things like that I actually can do. And I think learning to balance the hot and the cold of work life is something that has taken a little bit of time to do.
I love that. When I'm finished touring with Oprah, I might have time to paint the lounge room.
When you say that out loud.
No, I love it. I think it's fantastic. That's hashtag life goals there. I think what you've spoken about there is just such a fabulous way to articulate any transformative experience in life, which brings with it the best of times and the worst of times. And I think you've conveyed that so well, that there's trepidation and uncertainty, but then that liberation and that new opportunity. That's something I think a lot of people would relate to. As somebody that has had to deal with scrutiny when you've either left a job on your own terms or with your eventual departure from Seven, it was just an economic reality that was out of your hands that you've been so honest about. Coming out of the other side of that, but having to navigate that public scrutiny and that media intrusion. What's your advice to other people, and what are your reflections on that time now that you are at the other end of it in such a positive way?
I think every single industry is going through it, and everybody goes through it. You cannot tell me that your listeners don't know somebody who has had a job transition, whether it be by their own choice or not. We all go through it. I think, it's that old cliche of it's not what happens to you in life, it's how you handle it. Yes, the paparazzi intrusion can be another layer for many who have a profile. Unfortunately, it goes with the job. That's not to say that it's okay, but people are curious. I think they want to know how other people handle these situations. And it just so happens that when you've got a job with a profile, be it media, be it politics, that somebody in an industry that doesn't have that sort of spotlight of scrutiny goes, well, how did they handle it? What did they do? How did they move forward? So maybe it is a chance for those of us that do have a profile, to say, well, it's okay. It's going to be okay. I think for me, I had to take a moment and remind myself that I had been working really hard for a really long time. I had built my reputation. I had honed my craft, always a long way to go, don't get me wrong, and may the day never come that I don't keep learning, but, I'd worked really hard and hopefully was getting better at my job, and having that moment of going, all right, I've just got to have faith. If you've been an extraordinary school teacher or your career and it changes, or you've been a nurse or a doctor or whatever it might be, and things change, of just holding faith of you've done the work, you're good at what you do, it will work out. It might be different. The path might be different of where you thought you would be or what you would be doing, but you'll find something else and it will be probably as good, if not even better. It's just different. And different's not bad. I always think people get very set in their ways. There's a comfort attached to being in the same place and doing the same thing. Sometimes shaking that up can be the best thing for you, and to go, or maybe it's a completely different field. Maybe it's a transition. We've got one crack at this life thing. I've never wanted to be the person that woke up every day doing the same thing. So that can be an exciting opportunity. But yeah, I think it's a really hard thing to do depending on the circumstances. I'm very grateful because I'm saying this from a place where I have a partner. We live in a nice home. We're both healthy and well. My kids have finished school. There's a lot of boxes that I can tick that mean that I was able to breathe out a little bit. And I know that not everybody is in that same situation. And so, for them, my heart breaks if it is a struggle and you feel alone and you feel as though you don't have people around you to prop you up when you need propping up. But it's having that faith of you've done the work. What's the next opportunity?
And speaking of the next opportunity, if we could just go back a little bit to when you left Sunrise, you'd been there for a long time, over a decade, part of a very famous double act, Kosh and Mel, and then you went to Sunday night and you won a Walkley for your award, reporting on 7 News well into the early hours of the morning, the afternoon and evening of the Link Cafe siege in 2014. Let me ask you a little bit about that identity, because a lot of people have been going, oh, Mel, why are you not on Sunrise anymore? But did you feel like, well, I'm actually doing things that I've always wanted to do, but that was a bit at odds at some of the public perception? Because that's another thread to this conversation, I think.
I am forever grateful for the opportunities that Sunrise gave me, because it lets me now be in the position that I am. It lets me be able to step into that tub chair on stage and interview Oprah Winfrey. I had years and years of live news experience interviewing anybody, anywhere, anytime, and it let me hone my craft. To then move on to Sunday night, same, was a completely different learning experience. And I remember coming off, so live TV is quite a beast, you can't have dead air and you've got to keep the show rolling, and you use, your adrenaline is peaked for the entire 3 hours. And then going to Sunday night was a whole different beast, where I was doing long form, slow, steady, spending weeks researching stories, which I'd never taken that long to do anything in my life. I had to learn how to slow down. I had to learn how to do slow, gentle interviews. It was a very different genre. So that was a really cool thing to suddenly do something very, very different. So every step I've done, I think, has given me more skills to take me to the point where I am now, that lets me do some of the things that I'm doing now. So I'm completely grateful for every one of them. I also feel like what a privilege to have been in people's living rooms every morning when they were getting up and they were getting their kids to school. The number of women I still encounter who were pregnant at the same time I was, and their kids are the same age, and they remember being up feeding their babies and watching the show. Like, what a lovely privilege that was. I feel like we almost, I don't know how to word it, but transcended the screen, that it became, we built this community around us of our viewers were just so loving and loyal. And when I had my children, they knitted blankets and they sent the most beautiful gifts. And so we built this incredible community that I still feel I am nurtured by today. And that is just so precious. I'm really, really lucky, and I'm grateful. And so all the different things I've done along the way, I feel like they've come with me. And hence why when I did the Age Against the Machine book, I just thought, these are all the women that used to watch me and that are still with me, and they're living the life I'm living now. I'm going to do this book for me, but I'm doing it for them. And I feel, yeah, that's a pretty special gift to have in this industry.
I don't think it's too overblown to say that the revolution that happened in breakfast television in Australia in the early years of the millennium, so 2001, 2002, 2003, really shifted it, and that was you and David Kosh, who's also been a previous guest of the Stellar podcast, co-hosting Sunrise, and really shifting into a bit of that community dynamic that probably now lives more on social media. That's where people feel like they've got that parasocial relationship that people felt they had with you. What do you think breakfast TV would look like if that had come into your career at this point as opposed to now? How would it be revolutionised now? Do you think there's still that same sense of community, or do you think it serves a different purpose in people's lives now?
What we were able to create was a moment in time where we could shake up what had previously been done, and we acknowledged that it was really different. Just the fact that we were called Mel and Koshy had to go all the way to the chairman. Kerry Stokes had to tick it because nobody had, it was normally Melissa Doyle and David Kosh. We read viewer emails on air. We went into schools and built playgrounds. We reached into the community. We had a whiteboard with story ideas of people saying, can you delve into XYZ? And we'd write it on what we called the Roswell, and we would follow up stories on their behalf. Like, we really did things differently. And it came from a place of, I think we all want to be connected to something. There's, that's throughout time. There's been no different from whether you're sitting around a campfire sharing stories, or you're watching a breakfast television show, or you're listening to your podcast. We all want to hear one another's stories. We just want to, it all comes back to, we don't want to feel like we're alone. Nobody wants to feel like they're the only one going through something. So the more we can find ways to connect. So I think for us, that's where Sunrise became something so precious and special, was that connection that went both ways. We could connect with the audience, and the audience connected with us, and that was really quite different for Australian telly. There are so many ways that are doing it now, and yes, social media is probably the one that we think of, and I know that people are often critical of it, and there are so many bad parts of it, don't get me wrong, but there are also so many good parts of it, and sharing our voices with one another. So yeah, I don't know how it would be if we were starting out now. I don't necessarily think it would become what it did turn out to be. We were a bit dinky and daggy in the beginning, but that was our charm, and that's who we were. So it all felt very natural. I hate the term organic, but that's kind of what it was. Everything grew. Most of our big decisions weren't necessarily strategic thinking. They were, oh, let's do this. This feels right. Oh, let's start reading out emails, or let's go here, or sort of reading the room and responding to what people were giving us. And that's where it grew.
As I say, David Kosh, Natalie Barr, Samantha Armitage, of course, people that were on the other side of the network divide, like Carl Stefanovic, have all been guests here on the Stellar podcast. So I have to start with Koshi and ask you about that, because, as I say, you were such a close on-air duo, and that was a friendship that, David Kosh shared with our audience, definitely spilled into real life. Now that your lives are so different, and neither of you are there on breakfast TV, which means hopefully you can both sleep in a little bit, although I'm not sure if you didn't sound like Koshi did too much. Do you still keep in touch?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, gosh, we shared some extraordinary times and some really big moments, not just career-wise, but personally. I had 2 babies during my time on Sunrise and raising them, and he was, a step ahead. His children were a little bit older, but being that lovely figure in my life of, putting his hand up and giving me a reason to go home, or I'll cover this for you. You go home, you be mum, you go and do what you need to do. I do remember when I first came back after having Talia, after being on maternity leave, and we took the show on the road each week, each Friday, to a different state for the first few weeks, which when I think back now, I probably should have said no, because I was still feeding and she was like, 10 weeks old or something crazy. But I remember being up in far north Queensland and we're about to do the show, and I'm probably oversharing now, but it was 5:45, got to be on set any minute now. And because my baby wasn't with me, I had to express, and I'm in my room and I'm trying to express the milk. And of course, I'm panicking because I've got to be on air in a minute. And the more you panic, the less it flows. And I'm starting to cry. And there goes the makeup. And the floor manager's outside yelling for me, you've got to be on set in 5 minutes. And I remember Koshi coming past the door and from the outside and, are you okay in there? And I said, I'm trying to express milk and it's all falling apart and I can't do it. And just hearing his thunderous voice to everybody saying, she'll be out when she's ready. Let's get on with the show. He had my back. Mm-hmm. And we did lots of traveling. We covered many stories that were emotionally challenging, and we had each other's back. And you can't share those times and then walk away and not have a friendship forever.
And another person that was on set there was Natalie Barr,
yes.
who was a newsreader throughout that time. And again, she also had pregnancy on air.
Yes.
So sort of similar, the two of you would often talk on air and off air about some of those shared experiences.
So she got horrid morning sickness, poor Nat. And so when she was reading the news, and Koshi and I are kind of on one side of the desk and she's at the end, and I would watch her like a hawk because I could see the telltale signs when she was starting to feel a bit nauseous. And so she had her crackers under I hope I'm not giving away too many of Nat's secrets, but anyway, she had her crackers under the desk and I'd be watching her every word, and I could see when she was like, oh, this is not good, and I would jump in and save her. And, we had each other's back. We both were going through this extraordinary job, but having pregnancies, babies, toddlers, rocking up to work, having had no sleep the night before because we were up all night with a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old. And I think, unless you're going through that, you really don't know how hard it is to then rock up the next day and put on a face and smile and present for the next 3 hours. And we'd had not an ounce of sleep. So, yeah, that was a really precious. And Sonia, who did my hair and makeup through all of that time, who still does to this day, she had 3 children, similar ages, a little bit younger. And so same, she would nurture me when I was in the chair pregnant and tired. And then it was her turn to have her babies. So we had this beautiful supportive group around us of mothers and fathers who knew what we were going through. Koshi, Barrett's, they were dads. We all looked after each other, which I think is what made the whole show so very special.
What a great gift in a workplace to have colleagues, whatever industry you're in, to have your back. But in the industry you're in and we're in at that time, a particular sector, it's a tough industry. And, to have people that have really got your back to the level that they're watching out with the crackers under the desk when the morning sickness strikes, that's really special.
And even when I went to Sunday night, there were many stories I told on that program that were absolutely heartbreaking, like gutted me. But we would travel as a group of 4, cameraman, soundy, producer, journo, and we would debrief after a story. I always had this thing where after those I would try really hard to not take it home and to debrief while we were still together as a unit when we'd finished telling that story and filming. And same, there were so many times where I'm a bit of a crier, so I would just break down and let it all out, and we would sit there together and talk about it. And we'd often go for a walk as a team, but having people around you, as you say, no matter what you do, no matter what field it is, to know that you've got a supportive team around you that will hold your hand and pick you up when you fall over. And then there'll be another time where somebody else in the team would break it, whatever it was that would get them. So, you can't do that job and see that intensity of human emotion, happiness and sadness, and not be deeply affected. And I don't think you can do that alone.
Absolutely. And I think also having that solidarity in a working team helps when our industry can be misunderstood. And as we've touched upon earlier, anyone in the spotlight or in a public-facing industry can be subjected to a lot of, criticism, unkind things, even when social media wasn't so prevalent in the early years of Sunrise, there was still people will still find you, with their hate mail, and it's certainly something that a lot of people have talked about on this show. But again, thinking about Oprah and the conversation she's had, think about the way that what would have been said about her over the years. You would hope that that would not be said today.
I don't know. I think it's still happening a lot. I think some of the cruelty we see online is just ghastly. I think people forget that there's a real person at the other end. Maybe they think we don't see our social media or run it. I don't know. Or when they would write back in the day, they'd write letters into the network, or they'd direct it to me and it would land on my desk. And I got to the point where I remember I would always open my mail at work. I would never take it home, because taking those letters home and opening them in the sanctuary of my house just felt awful. And so I think people forget that there's a real person at the end doing our job as best we can and trying to navigate every day. And yeah, some days you nail it and other days you don't. But through all of that, I was trying to be a mum and trying to do all the things that every other person out there, is trying to find their way through managing their family or their parents or their role or whatever that might be. We're humans. And I know that people say, it comes with the territory, but I don't actually think it should. Just because you've got a profile or, some of the vitriol that's thrown at our politicians, I mean, God, who'd want to do that job? There's no way you would want that. So I think it's a case of you've got to find a way that you can manage it, which is maybe you don't read it or don't take it on. I think for me it was always, I loved my job so much. I loved what I did that just had to override everything else. And yes, there's criticism. I always thought if it was criticism about the way I had done a story or told a story, if it was about me professionally and I knew that I could have done better, then I'd take that on. All right, fair point. I probably didn't handle that as well as I should have. But if it's just nasty, don't like you, whatever, that's the stuff that you've just got to block, because that's somebody just venting for whatever reason it might be. I was reading this morning another article, Meghan Markle. My God, that woman can't even get out of bed without people just wanting to tear her down. I think it's like the old Salem witch hunts, isn't it? That we just need somebody to hate on for no particular reason other than they feel better about it. So it's probably going to continue forever. But I wish people sometimes had a moment of, she's a vulnerable young woman with a couple of small children, and like her or not, you don't always need to say the things that you say.
I completely agree, and I think you've really nailed it too when you talk about how people feel that they might be justified in giving some constructive criticism to anyone, including Meghan Markle, but there's no justification for cruelty, whether it is an elected federal politician or the Duchess of Sussex, or whether it is somebody that's hosting a television show. Why does it have to be so personal and vitriolic?
And I think we've all got to learn which voices do we listen to? Whose criticism do we take on board? Because you have to. You can't merrily go about your way in any career and never, ever listen to outside voices saying you could do that better or you could improve. And as I said earlier, I think I've always been my harshest, toughest critic. I'm the first one to come away from doing something and think, I didn't really do my best in that, or that was okay, I did. So there's always that. And I think you've always got to listen, but you've just got to know the voices that you want to listen to, the ones that actually matter, the people whose opinions they know what they're talking about and they matter to you, and block out all of the other noise.
A lot of people find that gets easier as we go through life. Has that been, for you, something that you've become more adept at filtering out and blocking
Easier
out?
to manage it and block it out, but that's not to say that it still doesn't sting when you get it. But I've touched wood. I think I've been pretty lucky that most people I think most people mean well. Most people are lovely and supportive and say nice things. So I wish there was more of that.
Just back to Nat Barr, she's obviously, when Samantha Armitage left the show a few years ago, Nat became co-host. How did you feel about that? Do you ever watch the show? Do you ever send notes from home? How do you navigate Melissa Doyle, former co-host of the show, as opposed to Melissa Doyle, viewer from home, or Melissa Doyle, occasional guest on the show?
Oh, if I go on, I'm just Mel guest. It's Nat and Shervo's show, and it's different to what it was when I left. I mean, I left in 2013. So we're talking, 12 and a half years ago, nearly. It was a long time ago, and there's been so many changes. And I go in, and there's a few key staff members who are still the same and have been there, but there's a hell of a lot of, these gorgeous, young, keen producers who I haven't met, and I'm excited to meet them and, watch them do their thing. Yeah, look, I'm so happy for Nat. I think when the show was growing, our audience was so precious. We did the show for them. We did the show for our viewers. We did the show for the people who wrote in saying, can you look into this? We're going to pop this story on the Roswell. Can you come and, build a playground in our school, whatever it might be. And we felt this really tender love and protectiveness, I think, of our audience, if they're the best words to use. I don't know. It's hard for a journo. I'm struggling for words here. But, we felt, we nurtured, we loved, we cared for them the way they cared for us. It was a really special, unique thing. And Nat loved and respected the audience in exactly the same way, that Koshi and I did. So to see her there and still feeling that way about our viewers, I'm really happy for her.
So will we never see you back on Breakfast TV? The woman that was your successor was Samantha Armitage. She was recently on the Stella podcast. She's just been hosting Golden Bachelor over at 9 and went on, filled in a little bit on the Today Show last summer and is doing that again this summer, which I asked her about. Nat, about you, it's going to be a little bit weird. Would we ever see you doing a summer fill-in, do you think, or a winter fill-in or a year-long fill-in on one of the Breakfast TV shows?
I've been there, done that. I had a great time. I did 14 extraordinary years. I left on top. I don't believe in going back. I believe in what's next. What's the next exciting thing to do? How do I keep evolving as a human, as a woman, as a journalist? What's my next challenge? What can I learn? What can I try? And I think that for me, and everybody is different, but for me, that's been my biggest driver continually of all my career of, all right, well, I might try this. You want me to do that? Okay, I've never done that. I'm totally scared, but I'll give it a red hot crack. What's the worst that can happen? I think that's what keeps me active and engaged and busy and fulfilled and challenged and all of those things. I'm curious. I love exploring. I want to know what's around the next corner. I want to try something new and I want to see if I can do it. And if I can't, then I'll, smile and walk away and do something else. But that's who I am, which I know is not everybody. So, yeah, no, I loved it, but I've done it.
I want to ask you about your marriage. Congratulations, Mel. You and your husband, John, have just celebrated your 30th wedding anniversary.
I mean, a child bride.
I was going to say, you must have been very young, honestly.
Not that young. 30 years. I know. It feels like it sounds silly, but crept up upon us. We had a moment of going, oh my God, that's a long time. How lucky we are. Just how lucky. It's probably pot luck, isn't it? But yeah, I feel, look, I couldn't have done the job I did, the hours I did, getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning for sunrise, traveling every single week, both here and around the world for Sunday night, doing all of those things without John holding the fort and stepping in when I was, stepping out. But it's gone both ways. I've always likened it to there's times where he's got his foot to the floor and he's in a really intense job or time and doing something, and I'll pick up as many of the pieces around home that I can to support him to do that. And then there's been other times where it's been me and he has supported me to do it. So I think for us, look, we're not the couple that sits back and analyzes it. I don't think I want to do that, but I do think we've let each other be who we are. We're individuals who are doing pretty well together, but we're still individuals. I've still got my things that I love to do. And, one of my biggest passions in life has been my involvement with World Vision and travelling to Africa. That's not something that John is really overly interested in doing, and that's fine. So I'll go do that. And then, he's sports mad. He'll go to any golf tournament or race or anything where there's loud noises and sport. You go do that, honey. You have a great time. So I think, you've got to let each other be the individuals that we are, but knowing when I say, hey, I really need your help on this, can you, helped me here and vice versa.
Well, I mean, I definitely won't ask you to overanalyze it, but I think that sounds like a partnership in the true definition of the word.
Yeah.
Though the sport anecdote is funny because I believe that was part of how you first met. You
Oh,
were,
my gosh.
working, I think, at a TV station in Canberra, and he rang in, and there was a challenge or an invitation to go swimming or something.
He was working for Australian Swimming, and I was newsreader at Prime Television, and he rang and asked me to go in a celebrity swim race, of which my immediate answer was, oh, God, no. And then I thought I'd be polite, and I said, look, but I'll sit on it and I'll call you back tomorrow. And because, my grandmother is a stickler for manners, so I rang him the next day just to say definitely no. And he said, I'll let you off if you buy me dinner. And I'm like, I'm not going to buy a boy dinner I don't even know. Anyway, he rang me the following week and asked me out to dinner, and we went, and here we are.
Much more civilised than going on a swim race. Sorry, John.
Oh, my Lord, as if I was going to do a swimming race.
Did he, and he never sort of managed then over the subsequent 30 years of marriage to get you to be interested in going on a swim race in your spare time? Still up for a nice dinner. Thanks very much.
Yeah, I'll take a dinner over a swimming race anytime.
Can I ask you a little bit about your children?
Yep.
Because your eldest, Nick, is 24 now, and Talia, known to a certain breakfast TV generation as Noodles.
Yeah, she'll be Noodles.
Sorry,
Talia
is 21 now. You're part empty nesters because I know Nick travelled overseas and went to college, I think, in the States for a while. So, but Talia's still there for now. So how are the two of you navigating this as a couple and as a family?
Oh, when Nick first left, it was 2020, and he went to college in Seattle, and that was a really hard moment as a family. First of all, farewelling him during COVID and the borders were closed and he could only go because he had a student visa, and knowing that we couldn't get to him was really, really hard because, it was not the easiest transition for him. Suddenly he's on the other side of the world, doesn't know anybody, and they're in lockdown. And so we couldn't get to him, we couldn't get him home. Yeah, that was challenging. But even just at home, the dynamics of, the dining room table where we all sat, we had to do a bit of rejigging, and, his room's empty and we had to close the door because every time I walked past, I'm like, oh my gosh. So that took a big adjustment. So he was over in college for 4 years, and then he's now back in Australia, which is super happy, and he's down in Canberra. So he's joined the Australian rowing team, and he's based at the AIS, and he's coxing. So
early starts.
Yeah.
Gosh,
it's a theme in our family, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes.
But I'm so proud of him for studying so hard. He did really well, and coxing has always been his passion since school days. And he's now on the Australian rowing team. So, I'm looking forward to see what the next few years will bring. Canberra's 3 hours down the road, so I'm super happy.
Yeah, very close.
Much closer. Talia's 21. She finished uni end of last year. She's still at home. I told her she can never leave. But no, she's flourishing and working really hard. And I'm so proud of them both. They've worked really hard. They're just really lovely human beings, which is what makes me the happiest. They're both kind and they're funny and they're fun, and I feel really lucky that if I had a choice of spending time with anyone in the world, that's who I want to spend time with. And so I'm very appreciative.
Well, I won't finish up by asking you what's next, because we know what's next. When you finish touring with Oprah, you're going to, do some painting around the house, and then next step in world domination. But I would like to finish just by when you said earlier how Oprah is 71. And I think given the work that you've done, your book was called Age Against the Machine, great title, by the way, and the visibility of women, you're only 55. Like Oprah, in 20 years, do you see yourself still being literally centre stage and managing a portfolio career in the same way?
I absolutely hope so. I love what I do. I love evolving. I love media. I love storytelling. I love sharing people's stories, being, as I said earlier, that being that facilitator to have somebody share their story with an audience in whatever format it might be is such a privilege. And that is what gets me up and about every single day, and that connection to an audience. So, yeah, I hope I'm still doing it at 70. I'm not good at sitting still. I like being busy. I've got a few other little ideas bubbling along that I want to do next year. I want to keep making things. I want to keep creating. I want to keep having an impact on somebody in some form of how do we all have these touch points and continue that connection together. So, yeah, look, I'll be a bit wrinklier, but I'll still be here and fit and active and busy. And I think, never has there felt more of a time for, when I say older women, maybe let's say mature, to shine. Just because you have a couple of crinkles around your eyes doesn't mean you can't do the job or do what it was that you did. If anything, I think we're getting better at our roles and what we do, and I'd love to keep going.
I've got to say, at the risk of ending on a superficial note, Mel, you look younger now than you did when you were on Sunrise, and we're talking.
Well, I was getting up at 3. I was haggard. That was tough. I get to sleep in now, so that certainly makes a difference. And I've also got time. I feel really, it's nice to be able to take the time to start the day walking the dog or go to the gym or being a little bit more conscious in what I'm doing and how I'm looking after myself. I think you've got different priorities from your 20s to your 30s to the years when you've got kids that it's all about job and children and, there's no other space. Whereas now I've got a little more space for me, and so I'm loving it.
Well, I have loved speaking to you, and Oprah in Conversation with Melissa Doyle kicks off in Sydney on December 4 before heading to Adelaide, Brisbane and Melbourne. We'll have a link to that in our show notes. I hope everything goes fabulously. You'll have to come back and spill the tea with Oprah's consent about how it went on the road. But Mel, lovely to speak to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sarah, for having me.